Welcome to this Vital Health podcast from the ISPOR conference in Glasgow, Scotland. I'm Duane Schulthess, the CEO of Vital Transformation. Today we're discussing the payer's view of accelerated approvals, and I'm joined by two very dear friends with whom I've had a long relationship. Firstly, Anja Schiel of the Norwegian Medicines Products Agency, as well as a statistician who's defined a lot of the methodologies used at the European Medicines Agency. Anja, it's great to see you. It's been a long time. How you been?
Yeah, it's been a long time, Duane. So I'm happy to be here again.
I'm glad you are.
Yeah, lots of things have changed in
the
the meantime.
to talk about. And of course, I'm also joined by my other friend, Niklas Hedberg from TLV in Sweden, former head of UNETA. Niklas, always a pleasure, sir. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
You two have both been involved at the European level, as well as, obviously, you're very active in your own member states, you in Norway, you in Sweden. Can you define the difference in methodology and requirements that you have when you're making a decision for access at the European level and your national level? So this effectiveness, efficacy gap that Hans-Georg Eichler used to talk about back in the day. Anja, I'll start with you. What is this gap?
If you want to use some statistical terms, it's the difference between an internal validity of a clinical trial and the external validity of transforming the results into a different setting, different patients.
Okay.
We all know that the clinical trials are selected populations. As a statistician, I will instruct trialists to minimize the variability, which we assume is irrelevant in the context of proving the absolute benefit of a drug. But when I go to the reimbursement side, HTAs are not looking for absolute effects in a selected group. They are looking for generalization. How does this translate into my population? And populations and healthcare systems are substantially different in the different member states. And hence, this one package that comes out of EMA, which is the ideal experiment, is not always good enough for the others to make a decision on whether, in the context of my healthcare system and my patients, it is a treatment that will offer as much value as it might offer for the Swedish or the Germans or the Spanish.
Niklas, obviously from your experience having to, I'll say this diplomatically, corral 27 different HTAs for many years, how much difference is there in these opinions that Anja is talking about defining the value based on each individual member state? There are 27. How did you do working to align those folks?
I'd like to give the answer from the angle that we must separate assessment and appraisal. That is what Anja started with. So in the assessment, when we do the work together on the European level, we can afford to ask for the best possible information, best possible data. This is a long-term process. We keep saying that EMA has now celebrated 30 years. ISPOR is doing that this week, but EMA has also celebrated 30 years. They weren't built overnight.
No.
If we look long-ranging, we also want to come to a position where we actually influence how clinical trials are set up. There is one factor that has been very pronounced over a number of years. Companies typically can come up to us and say, we know this is not what you wanted, but this is what was enough for FDA.
Right.
Our long-term range goal is to build a system where we come closer to the best possible data. However, in the national setting, for example, at TLV, we need to make a reimbursement decision. In the appraisal and decision-making phase, we must pay attention to the balance between the risk of making a type A error and a type B error. So, do I say yes now to a product that later on shows to be a bad buy? Or do I say no now and later on find out I actually should have said yes? If you have a decision situation, you must find that balance. And that depends on how large are the risks for the patients in terms of not getting the treatment. We have, for example, from our agency said we must probably take larger risks on the economical side when we have a progressive disease that comes with irreversible worsening of function.
And that gets into unmet medical need. Part of this challenge around bringing drugs in with a standard where you're addressing unmet medical need is this ability of this, how much evidence is enough given the need that you have in the market. And this is a big challenge. Now, you've both been part of this study that's been released or being released by the Office of Health Economics, Achieving Accelerated Patient Access to Cancer Care in Europe, a PACE. this is potentially a new type of framework to address some of these issues where you want enough evidence, you want that pristine clinical trial, but you also need to address the effectiveness in the member states. Can you tell me a little bit about this project?
We're trying to find solutions, and the more complex the question, the less likely you find a simple solution.
Yeah,
and here we see this accelerated. It talks about speed. Every patient and also the industry will tell you we are all in a terrible hurry because these brilliant drugs are coming. We, on the other side, and Niklas used to say that it's the dam, and some people are up there and they want more water, and we are standing there with stones tied around our feet, and it's already here, and we're screaming, not more, not more.
Well, some of us will sell you a straw, Anja.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, okay, I could sell, ice cubes to penguins if it really was necessary, but I wouldn't do that. And in a healthcare system, we cannot afford that.
Sure.
So we have to have a certain balance between the risk of the investment, the AENDB here. The European system is based on solidarity. We have a universal healthcare system, which means it's not just my money I'm wasting. It's everybody else's money. My colleagues, my neighbors, everybody else in Norway is paying for me when I go to the hospital and I get something. They pay for me if I want to have a very, very expensive fourth-line oncology treatment with the promise of 3-week progression-free survival. The society pays. The society has the right to decide when the risks are not acceptable anymore, because the money I spend there, I will have to take away from someone else. Someone else in the system will not get the health that maybe came from a really good study, and that's the problem. There was an RCT, it was huge, the effect was without any doubt. We are very sure that the majority of our patients, when we treat them with that drug, will have effect, and then along comes something with none of these safety elements. The effect is difficult to judge at best. The absolute magnitude is already questionable. The outcome you measured is something that might not even be relevant for patients. Patients don't care about observed response rates. The patient doesn't feel that. The patient feels when time is longer until they die, or if they feel better and are in a state of good health. And these kind of arguments are always kind of set aside by the industry, because they come and say, well, yeah, but this is brilliant, and you have to invest into us. But healthcare systems don't invest. We finance health, and we finance it in a social context.
I think one of the other challenges we're getting into here is if we start looking at a lot of the oncology products that are coming to market. I mean, if we're looking at acute lymphoblastic leukemia, you're talking what, 300-400 patients a year globally? If you're looking for OS, overall survival, or an outcomes trial, that's going to be really, really hard. And if a company is going to try and do an OS in that, you may end up, and particularly if it's a mid-pediatric condition where the life cycle of the disease is 8 to 10 years, you're going to be out of patent by the time you get an endpoint.
Like Niklas says, it's not that we don't understand that maybe nothing else is feasible than a single-arm trial with a very small sample size. Agreed. But then you need to ask us what we need at minimum to make a decision. And our minimum for the decision is different than regulators, because they live in a world of, well, sometimes we just want to send out the incentive that we support the research. This is fine, but not if it comes with a 5 million prize ticket.
There are increasing questions on the validity of an accelerated or conditional approval. Do we need the conditional and accelerated approval? Is that still, in your opinion, is this a valid approach to regulatory approval?
There is in no one's interest that the patients shall die waiting for the evidence. But we still need to have some evidence base. So there must be a balance also here. In most contexts, I think there is a pressure on the system to provide treatments as early as possible. But let's figure that all of those 400 patients globally were in the clinical trial program. All of them have already had the product. And when it's then registered and comes to a very, very high price, is there any chance to say, no, we're not going to pay that? Have we already committed to pay a price that is set unilaterally by the company? I think that's where the framework of APAS comes in, because so many agencies are now in dear need of some kind of framework. It's not providing a rule book, but a toolkit.
Correct.
If you need to build a system in your own country, these are a few reasonable thoughts to keep in mind. You can use these tools.
So now 20% of all conditional accelerated approvals now are withdrawn. I mean, this is a mechanism, we see that. Does the APACE framework actually fit in, and would that help you? Does this give you more guidance that you would like to have?
The APACE is just one of the elements that we're seeing in Europe, where everybody is trying to explain to the industry, when you start, understand where the finish line is.
Yeah.
We have been preaching that for more than a decade now. It's not approval. Approval is somewhere halfway. The finish line is getting the drug to the patient, which in Europe requires reimbursement. And this is not ever going to change. This is how we build our system. We already told the industry a long time ago, you need to understand at the beginning what the financial potential at the end really is. We all know they have this pricing corridor, and we all know they get it terribly wrong on occasion. They are dreaming of prices that are just not feasible. We have fixed budgets. Within these budgets, we have to pay for all the health in our healthcare system. And that's exactly this point. We want equity, so we want to pay for those that require more. That means that others have to give something up. How much are we willing to give up in our healthcare system before we say it's not acceptable anymore? Small numbers are a problem, but all of the HTAs in Europe have loopholes, backdoors, special pathways for exactly that particular reason. Accelerated, in oncology we have the problem there is too much of the salami slicing, so I just count myself down until I fall under the orphan in number of patients, and then I want to have all the goodies the European system is offering you, and I want to call myself special. Everybody wants to try to come into that category. That was not what we wanted for orphan. For accelerated, for prime, none of these products belong in there. They are part of a larger population. When we talk about orphan and rare, then we're talking about genetic diseases that inflict lifelong misery, often start early on, some of the chronic diseases that are extremely rare and that you cannot really lump together in some meaningful way. And for those, there it really comes that yes, we would pay more. Yes, we would pay more if we still had money, which we hadn't spent on stuff that we pay too much for.
Let me just push back on one thing you just said. I mean, that probably comes as a shock to Anja. Look, if you take something like B-cell lymphoma, okay, we have very good therapeutic pathways now that work 66% of the time. Someone walks in with B-cell lymphoma, they get a treatment. We have very good hematological treatments. They get the standard of care, which is now a biosimilar. It's essentially you're paying nothing for it. You're getting it for pennies a pill or an injection. That's great. 2/3 of the time, they walk out cancer-free. Now, what do you do with that other third that is no longer responding? And what you see with a lot of the oncology pipeline now is a lot of these treatments that we're using the term salami slicing are actually late stage treatments. Why in the world would you go against a very effective biologic that's treating 2/3 of the patients? What you're going to be interested in is, are we just surrendering that 1/3 of B-cell lymphoma who didn't respond? This is where CAR Ts are coming in, but there's also a whole nother line of modalities that are coming in now. We're seeing mixed modalities with radiological isotopes combined with monoclonal antibodies and perhaps affibodies. Now that is an orphan population, Anja, and they do need a treatment.
The outcome is that some people are really, really terribly unlucky.
Yes.
And in the very, very last line, all of the drugs have been approved with the famous single-arm trial. They did not have to compare themselves to something else. But the moment something is there, then we expect that the next one does compare themselves to it, and they don't.
Well, but sometimes they do. That's how we've gotten CAR T.
Ooh, very rarely. No, we got the CAR Ts, all of them single-arm trial, and then everybody was saying, well, there's never, ever going to be a randomized clinical trial, and then they moved up a line, and suddenly all the randomized clinical trials were coming.
Those are areas where we need a treatment.
We always need better treatments, but that's really the point between the unmet medical need, which you want to know the definition of, and I guess none of us has any clue by now what that definition is.
We got plenty of time.
And the need for better treatments.
Sure.
every treatment has always a certain percentage of failures. There's nothing that is 100%.
Correct.
So yes, there's always a group, and we have to debate how much money can we spend
Which
on
we
them.
are right now.
Exactly, and that's the point.
Let me pivot to something else here. If we talk about the APACE program, or at least the platform or pathway or whatever we want to call it, increasingly more and more, a lot of this stuff is sounding like how we got to know each other, the adaptive licensing, adaptive pathways projects. We were all very involved in this 12 years ago. We were all there on the ground fighting this war here. It got tons of pushback. The steamroller came against us. We all thought it was a pretty darn good idea. And it sure seems like a lot of the discussion we're having right now could potentially be solved around that framework. And that's kind of what APACE is. It's let's phase gate an adaptive license and let's put this in. I mean, what do you think, Niklas? Are we re-envisioning an adaptive licensing here a little bit?
Yes, and being very respectful of the good thinking at EMA, it became, for HTAs and payers, it became a little bit of a thing coming top down.
Yeah.
And I think that's where there was such a substantial pushback. The response was, this is actually not something for you to decide over us. Now it comes more from beneath, bottom up. This, can I say, working group says, we hear that these challenges occur in many payer contexts. Can we provide you with, once again, a framework, a toolbox? Because when you take the decision that you need to build a pathway for early access, these are things to remember or to bring on. Not that we decide for you that you should do it, but when you're in the position having decided that on your own, this is our contribution.
I looked it up because I remember it was in 2014.
Yes.
And do you know which buzzword came up for the first time in that document?
What?
Real world data.
Real world evidence, yes.
Yes, because it was, and I think the problem of the entire scheme was it was coming too early.
Yeah.
It was asking for real world data when nobody was talking about real world data yet.
Well, we were doing a lot of work.
Yeah, but I mean, it's more like we had started this discussion, this broad discussion about why the regulatory evidence isn't fitting for us. And we started pointing at elements. And one of these elements was that we say we honestly don't want to make decisions on clinical trials. We would prefer we could make decisions on real-world data.
Based on what's in the data and real effectiveness data based on real patients.
Yeah, but the catch-22 is you will not get real-world data unless you have a drug approved. So this kind of conundrum has been going on for us for long. But it also meant that, sure, there are agencies that do reassessment after a time. Managed entry agreements often require some kind of reassessment after a couple of years, and then you expect that something better has come on the evidence side. And that is exactly where I think that it was too early.
Yeah.
The idea is obvious for everybody who's in the system, but changing systems, in particular in Europe, is going in 10-year increments, I would say. Yes?
And it's not just one system, it's 27 systems.
Yeah, exactly.
And we have changed the regulatory system anyhow, because this was when the clinical trial paradigm was still true. You did phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3 studies. Now we see more and more market approvals on phase 2 and sometimes even on phase 1 studies.
Yeah.
So basically the adaptive pathways have also built their way into the more regular regulatory stream.
And how much of this is the fact that when we were initially talking about MAPS back in the day, the Medicines Adaptive Pathways, that there was not the legal structures even in some of the member states? We used to discuss this, about half the member states can't do this legally. They weren't allowed under the current regulatory structure.
It has to do with how you can generate the evidence and when you can generate it. Lots of people have understood that, yes, you can make this trial for the regulators. But why don't you in parallel start generating the evidence for us that doesn't need to follow the rules of inferential statistics for RCTs, There are other ways to achieve this. Identifying the evidence gaps early, then you can come really close, and that's what the HAR is trying to achieve. You can come close to the time of approval and you cut down on this period that most industry used years on occasion, when they came for the first time and discussed with us, and then we told them this and this and this and this needs support. You don't have that data. Then they went back to the drawing board and started with new ideas or new studies, instead of having had that conversation at the very start of their pivotal trial trajectory, and making sure that you have everything in place when you need it.
Part of the problem, though, is that is hard. As you know, as I know, I mean, you've read our CAR-T study. I mean, this stuff is not easy to do.
But we went to the moon not because it was easy.
Because it is difficult, and we shall do these things because they are hard. So what are you looking for when you get a real-world evidence package? Let's say you get something at TLV. What sort of data do you want? Are you getting what you need now?
Ooh, I'm sorry. I'm a bit too far from the daily business these days. I do know that still the main challenge is where Anja started this discussion. We need to mend the balance between internal and external validity. Sometimes we get applications where we realize that all the answers respond to questions. It's easier with claims data, of course, than if you desire.
But the problem with claims data is it's curated, right? You're not getting it right from the EHR source. This is the problem. Someone has already made a decision when you get to claims.
If I frame it, we can make better decisions where there is a very clear connection between effectiveness and use or usage. So the electronic health databases, for example, they have 100% coverage. Everyone is in there. Yes. Every dispensation of a drug is in there. We don't know the compliance, of course. So we have a few examples of decisions based on that. But when it comes to the more, what in Darwin EU would call complex or very complex studies, I'm afraid that we still have more guidance documents on real-world evidence than we have use cases where someone has made a decision based on quality registries.
Are we seeing confluence now in the interpretation of RWE among the member states? Obviously, this is the whole point of putting HTA closer to EMA. I mean, we're trying to get there. Is this coming?
You can split everything up in three uncertainties. Scientific, HTA modeling or not modeling, that depends on where you are, and the actual decision, the appraisal. The industry wants us to use real-world data here in the scientific uncertainty, the famous external control arms and everything, and we say no, because this is not working for us. Where we can use it is in the middle. When you model, you can put in whatever you want. You can create the world to your liking. Then you can use it. Where it is less structured and objective is in the appraisal. Obviously, they will listen to studies that say this and this is better, the tablet over the IV or whatever preference. These kind of things will go in there. Here in the middle, yes, we use real-world data. Often enough, we are still at this point that is so frustrating where we say, we would have loved to use it. The methodology was okay, you wanted to use. Your data is rubbish.
Yeah.
The US data have this problem that we are living in this world of perfection. Every person in our countries has one single number to which I can connect everything they do in this country, meaning that every healthcare interaction, every drug could theoretically be linked to that person, and nobody is missed. We have an extremely high completion rate in our registries. Nonetheless, we are still not quite so good in using that data, I would say. But the US data, it's so fragmented. You guys change, 5 times in your lifetime your insurer? And the insurer owns the data, not the government or someone else. And we have this beautiful system where it's social contract.
But the GDPR prohibits my ability to get into that data. I can't get that data in Europe. So I can go to a hospital system, and I can go into Vanderbilt University and say, okay, I want access through your commercialization arm to these 4 million patients because we need to analyze AMR related to sepsis, complex UTI, and HAP and VAP, and I can get 4 million patients immediately, and I can look at a 10-year cohort. All right, now they may move around, but I can guarantee I'll get 1 million patients out of that I can analyze. And it's unfettered. Now they're de-identified. I can tell you who they are.
You don't need to look for fans for GDPR here.
Niklas, you're coming in, please.
Yeah, I'd like to turn the question around a bit now when we're talking about real-world evidence, because it feels like we have talked about it in a way that the agencies are the problem, and that we carry the full responsibility.
I've never said that, Niklas. How dare you?
Regularly, we hear from companies in reimbursement submissions, we know that we don't have the data that you would normally require or want, but it's not feasible or even possible to get at this time.
Yeah.
So let's agree on a plan for collecting data. That's quite a normal bid these days. What we really need, and I've been preaching this for 15 years, we need a global handshake of the same kind that we had on the p-value.
Okay.
Do you know that we have missed the centennial anniversary? Because
of the p-value.
2025.
I did not know that. Gosh, let's sell it. Let's toast a glass to the p-value, please.
The original publication was by Fisher et al. In 1925.
I did not know that.
And it is. I don't defend the p-value. That's not what I admire with Fisher. What I admire is that they succeeded in creating the global handshake.
Yeah.
Everyone
agrees to the standard.
Agrees to the standard.
No, that's fine.
No one, even if you don't appreciate that p-value is the full truth, we have agreed that we should all pretend it's the truth, and no one claims it's 0.06.
Obviously, we agree now, but there was a point where we didn't. And we could look at some surrogate endpoints and alternative endpoints. Cholesterol for heart attack risk, okay? When this was rolled out 20 years ago, there was no agreement that that was a benchmark that we could use. There takes some time until you can establish these surrogate and alternative endpoints as a valid biomarker and to give you actual outcomes. In order to do that, we need to test and validate. I'm winding this back to go back to unmet medical needs. So if we're looking at a lot of these surrogate endpoints and alternative endpoints, all of this relates around the definition of unmet medical need. Do we have a good definition now? And what do we need to do if we don't?
No, we don't have a good definition of unmet medical need.
Fair enough.
And I'm also always pointing out, unmet medical need is a term for regulators.
Yes.
I try to convince my colleagues we should never, ever use it at all, because it doesn't fit in our decision framework.
But you're also a regulator.
Yes. Unfortunately, I tend to have this...
You have two hats, don't you?
Slightly.
And so does he, by the way.
Before I say I disagree, I need to ask, what shall we use instead in the HTA world?
We should explain much better the situation in which we feel that there is a need for either a treatment or an improved treatment. The unmet medical need in people's minds, it's the famous, you're on an island, you have a headache and there's no aspirin. That's a desperate unmet medical need. Nonetheless, I guess most people would not consider aspirin something essential for mankind.
But it's contextual based on the circumstance.
Exactly. And we live in the contextual world for the HTA. Regulators live in this absolute world. Absolute benefit. Yes, if you prove it in the experiment, that's fine enough. Then we let you go through and then you can go run wild. And we see what comes out at the end when it's in the real world. We only exist in the real world. That is the difference.
Well, I don't know. I know a few people where I might disagree with that.
But then your definition is not the one the regulators have for unmet medical need. And that's exactly this confusion, because there is an expectation that we should use it in the same way when even I as a regulator don't really know anymore what it is.
Niklas, what's your opinion on this about unmet medical need?
I think it will be very difficult to stop using it in the HTA world because it's so firmly grounded in the regulatory world. It's unlucky that it's an either-or in the regulatory world. I've said that for many years also. The regulators must come from a yes or no.
Yeah.
Because in the real world, outside of Ducktown or wherever the regulator, there is always a scale.
Yeah.
You're expected actually to map up that. We can probably talk about severity of disease or something else, but then expectations from the patients, from the public, from the companies must not be tied to the unmet medical need term. If that is left to the regulators, it must not be referred to when it comes to us. Then we must talk about severity of disease or something else, because there are a number of frameworks, and I think there's quite a good alignment in many contexts, in many countries. That's a complex system. It is divided into different sections, and also comparative treatments comes in and absolute effectiveness rather than relative effectiveness. How much good does it really do?
A lot of the easy stuff has been solved now, particularly with a lot of the cancers, as we've talked about. We have some very, very good biosimilars that are curing more than half of people now in certain conditions in oncology. If you had one recommendation now related to, the accelerated approvals, the PACE network, what do we do around oncology? What would be one recommendation if you could implement it right now? Anja, I'll start with you.
You have to leave this paradigm of one gene, one drug, one target, one indication. This is not how you will create treatments in the future. And then I'm not necessarily talking about just finding new combos of everything. I think it's about time. And let me put the other catchphrase, AI is going to help us here. Because the complexity of the human body is something that we have reduced to what we always do. We keep it simple.
Yeah.
Because this is how we can work and how we can do something. We need to now embrace the complexity, because this is the basis of all this personalized treatment, and we need to understand the single patient better, which conflicts with our group level approaches on many things. This has to stop. This is not the future of medicine at all. There has to be a shift in mindset. And that makes it more complex, more difficult. Industry will not like to have to do that. But in the end, if you really want to bring more than these homeopathic incremental increases to the world of oncology, you have to be more bold.
If we look at the last 2 Nobel Prizes in science, one was for quantum computing and one was for protein folding and AI. So, that may be coming. It may be coming. Again, we'll have to see. Niklas, from your perspective.
Every payer I know of, and I guess all of them or almost all of them, want to, need to, and must spend their money on healthcare, because otherwise they wouldn't be around. So they want to buy drugs. Most of them also want to buy expensive drugs if they do a lot of good. That's the game. We must all recognize that increasingly they need the help to manage the risks when they realize I might now perform a type A error. I might give reimbursement or payment to something that shows to be not as good or not good at all as we expected. What will happen then? How am I guaranteed that I will either get my money back, get a completely new price, get the agreement with the patients that, okay, we stop the treatment now, or no new patients, because this value proposition wasn't true. We must take their concern for real, and we must meet up and join them, because as long as there is no risk management of the type A errors, the reluctancy to spend the money in that space will still be there.
Niklas and Anja, it's always great to speak to you. We could go for another 3 hours, and in fact, we may later anyway, just for pleasure. Really, it's been too long. It's great to see you two. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
Thanks.
This podcast was supported by Merck Sharp & Dahm as part of the APACE project in collaboration with GlaxoSmithKline and AstraZeneca. Video by Ben Harbour. Editing by Caden Drake. The Vital Health Podcast is a production of Vital Transformation, LLC, copyright 2025.